100 million users in 60 days. Instagram needed 2.5 years for that. The fastest growing app in history, but this story didn't begin in 2022. It began 70 years earlier, with one question, and along the way, it died twice. 1950. British mathematician Alan Turing published a paper and planted a single bomb inside it. Can machines think? Turing knew that question was a trap. What is thinking? Nobody could define it. So he threw it away and proposed a game instead. The imitation game. An interrogator exchanges written messages with two hidden players, one human, one computer, and must work out which is the machine. If the machine fooled the interrogator often enough, Turing argued, the debate was over. We call this the Turing test, still the benchmark today. Back then, computers filled entire rooms, and only a handful existed on Earth. Turing still believed machines would one day succeed at this game. Turing never lived to see the answer. But his question would outlive him, and 70 years later be tested in everyone's pocket. First, the idea needed a name. That name would arrive 6 years later at a summer workshop in a small American college town. 1955. A young mathematician named John McCarthy wrote a research proposal containing a phrase no official and ever used before. The proposal was accepted. In the summer of 1956, a workshop gathered at Dartmouth. McCarthy, Marvin Minsky, Claude Shannon, and Nathaniel Rochester. For roughly 2 months, they did nothing but brainstorm. No product, no company. Just one enormous claim: every aspect of intelligence can be imitated. That summer, a science was born. And the early years were dizzying. Programs proved theorems, played games, and answered simple questions. In 1958, Frank Rosenblatt unveiled the perceptron, a machine inspired by the brain's neurons, one that learned from examples on its own. The press went wild. Headlines promised machines that would soon walk, talk, copy themselves, and even become conscious. Yet the machine could only tell simple images apart. Remember this gap between promise and reality. Soon, it will nearly destroy the entire field. Then, in 1969, one of the field's brightest minds picked up a pen and drove a mathematical knife into the perceptron's heart. Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert published a book called Perceptrons, a cold, mathematical proof of what single-layer neural networks could never learn. The book landed hard. Research on learning machines went cold. Funding drifted elsewhere. But the real blow would come from across the ocean. Lightbill prepared a report for the British government's Science Council. His verdict was merciless. The report said artificial intelligence had delivered on almost none of its grand promises. Across British universities, funding was cut, grant after grant. Around the same time, American defense agencies reached similarly bleak conclusions and shut off the money. The field collapsed on 2 continents at once. That era is now called the AI winter. No money, no prestige, little hope. Working on AI meant risking not being taken seriously. Here was the bill for the headlines: conscious machines promised, simple classifiers delivered. Remember, this idea died twice. This was death number 1. But a few stubborn researchers refused to quit. The computers, they said, were simply too weak. The comeback would arrive on 64 squares. 1997 New York. IBM's computer Deep Blue sat down across the board from the world chess champion. Deep Blue won. A machine had toppled the world champion at humanity's showcase game. The headlines exploded again. Right, but for the wrong reason. Deep Blue wasn't thinking. It searched positions by brute force at staggering speed. Outside of chess, it couldn't do one single thing. The strange part, the approach that won that night would lose in the long run. You will see why shortly, at a photography contest. Remember the perceptron? The learning machine buried under books? It was quietly coming back, Not one layer this time, but layers stacked on layers. Researchers called it deep learning. The idea wasn't new. Two ingredients had been missing: mountains of data and massive computing power. Then the world changed. The internet piled up billions of photos and texts. The data problem had solved itself, without anyone planning it. The computing power came from gaming graphics chips. And in 2012, at a contest filled with millions of photos, history split in two. The contest was called ImageNet. Computers compete to recognize objects in photographs. In 2012, a deep neural network named AlexNet entered. AlexNet crushed its rivals by a startling margin. Deep learning, trained on big data with graphics chips, worked far better than anyone expected. That is the spark of the modern AI boom. Overnight, the whole field changed direction. Everyone rushed toward neural network. Here is the answer to the first death. No genius revived this idea. Data and power did. It was simply born too early. Now you see Deep Blue's secret. The rule-memorizing machine stayed in one room. The machine that learned from examples began opening every door. 4 years later, DeepMind's program AlphaGo challenged the Go champion, Lee Sedol. Experts believe this victory was at least a decade away. In 2016, AlphaGo defeated Lee Sedol. The 10-year forecast had expired in 4. Nobody trusted the timelines anymore. But these were still single-purpose machines. One recognized photos, one played Go. The real revolution arrived in 2017, in one supremely confident paper. The title, Attention is All You Need. The architecture it introduced, the transformer. Today, it is the skeleton of nearly every AI you use. Large language models, trained on oceans of text with this architecture, did one thing: predict the next word. At scale, that game turned strange. November 30th, 2022. OpenAI placed one of these models inside a plain chat box and released it for free. ChatGPT. 100 million users in 60 days. Instagram had needed 2.5 years. TikTok, 9 months. The fastest growing app in history. And so Turing's prophecy entered everyone's pocket. You exchange messages with a machine behind a curtain. The imitation game is now daily life. 70-year lesson. This field is not a line, but a cycle. Hype, winter, patience, boom. Twice dead, twice reborn, and still turning. If these tools are so powerful, why do some get banned? Next video, the story of the forbidden A's. Subscribe so you don't miss it.